That's not good. Now, it's fair to say I am more than a little embarrassed because I've just managed to crash the DJI Mini 4 Pro with its 360 obstacle avoidance sensors whilst testing how good those obstacle avoidance sensors are and its active tracking capabilities. Yeah. However, there is more to this than meets the eye, because in this video I'm going to tell you exactly what happened and leave you, the viewer, to decide whether this was actually user error, so all my fault, or whether one of the latest and greatest new features of the DJI Mini 4 Pro is fundamentally flawed. But not only that, I'm going to show you how this drone can perform miracles, and I'm going to show you one of the closest shaves you will have ever seen when it comes to a drone narrowly avoiding crashing and smashing itself into the floor. So let's get into it. So traditionally, when it comes to active tracking, this is how it works. Let's take the DJI Mini 3 Pro for example. What you then do is you fly the drone to the set altitude and distance you want to track you from. You draw a box on your screen to select the target. Then what you then do is choose whether you want it to trace, so either from the front or behind or parallel. And then what you do is you hit that go for your active tracking, and then you walk on your merry way, letting the drone follow you in the direction you have just set. Now, even drones such as the DJI Mavic 3 Classic that have got this real fancy little wheel for selecting even more angles with which the drone can actually track you from. Essentially, it's still the user or the operator that selects the distance and altitude from the target with which it is following, using a manual control and the sticks on the controller. Now, with the DJI Mini 4 Pro, they introduced a brand new system. This system gave us this new indicator on our screen right here. And what this allowed us to do is have much more control when using automatic flight modes. We have got this inner circle and the outer circle. Okay, so basically we can manually switch between the two in flight for creating some really cool dynamic shots. Now, the way the altitude and distance from the subject is set is within this menu on the DJI Fly app. If we go into our control tab and then focus track, what we can then do is adjust these sliders. So as you can see, we have got the inner circle, outer circle, and then we can have a minimum distance of 4 meters. By default, it's 5. And again, with the altitude, you can select that to all the way down to 0.5 meter off the ground, or by default, it is set at 5 meters. So let me just show you how this works in practice. Now, on the DJI Mini 4 Pro, when we go to active track, what we need to do is just select ourselves on screen and then click go. Then what it will do is it will automatically start the active track from behind us. It is then up to the user operator to basically change that. Now, the way that the drone works is it doesn't actually know or can't recognize whether it is looking at the front of you or the back of you. The way it determines whether to follow you from the back or the front is purely based on the direction of travel. So essentially, if you started to walk forwards and you had it to track from behind you, the drone would then take a few seconds, then it will maneuver itself to be in the position with which you requested. So what happened when it came to crashing the drone then? Because of course that's what we want to discuss. Now, when the drone was set to track me from behind, it basically tracked me from behind at whatever distance and altitude I'd already set it at, which is basically in line with what I was expecting and the way that previous DJI drones have actually behaved. So I thought there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. However, some of you did actually pick up when I did my video that I was a little confused at the drone's behavior, because when I used this new wheel to select me from the front, it was rising to 5 meters. Indeed, that is the altitude set in the DJI Flight app menu. Now, what I generally found is that was really confusing, because ultimately I always thought that the operator's instructions, as in where I particularly put the drone to track me from, i.e. in front of me, would always take precedent. Whereas it seemed, for some bizarre reason, without me expecting it, it decided to just raise in altitude to that 5 meters. But weirdly, it only did it when I selected that front view. However, it has to be said, maybe this is a mistake of mine, I did generally feel that it was possibly a bit of a glitch didn't quite understand what was going on. Maybe it was because there was obstacles around and it was trying to avoid them, okay? But certainly it caught me off guard. Now, during this active tracking test, I even tracked me from the front previously, where I had flown the drone to a specific level, and as it was tracking me from the front, again, it didn't deviate. It did exactly what I'd expected it to do. Basically, where I had made the manual input, I had set the distance and the altitude I was happy with, and the drone just tracked me absolutely perfectly whilst I was walking forwards and the drone was flying backwards. After I'd performed this absolutely incredible test with the Mini 4 Pro, what I wanted to do is see if the drone could fly backwards, okay, keeping me in the front view, and essentially track me back through the obstacle course. Almost impossible, but I thought, hey, let's give it a go. So what I'd done is, because of course, as I go to active track myself, I draw myself on the screen. I then have to click go, and then as you can see, it defaults behind me, as we've already seen. However, what happened is, because the drone wasn't behind me, it was in front of me. What I then did is, as I clicked for the drone to follow me from the front, even though I'd already set the distance and altitude I wanted it to track me from, the drone just decided it was just going to rise up, and essentially this drone managed to hit them. Hence, of course, the damage to this side of the drone. And this is where you're going to see possibly the most miraculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Because as the drone released itself, basically from the branches, it was heading all the way down, literally vertically, and it must have got to, honestly guys, I wish I was wearing a body cam. It was just insane. I was expecting to start walking over to my drone to find it in a pile on the floor. It must have got about 1 inch. I swear to God, the props was about 1 inch off the ground. Even if I pause the camera view right here, you can see how close it was to the ground, because you can see where the gimbal was, or the camera view. And what happened is the most incredible thing. As it was about to hit the ground, it spun these two props. I'd literally watched it do it, and it quickly righted itself, then raised up. Let's just replay that again. Honestly, I'm flabbergasted at what happened. So as you can see, as it flies all the way down vertically, okay, it spins these props and just rights itself. Absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't the end of it. So even though it had just essentially pretty much crashed, it had got snagged on a tree, for some reason it then decides to continue to rise all over again. It does the exact same thing all over again, hits the branches, only this time as it's coming down, it doesn't quite get so close to the ground. Same thing again, it spins these props, it rights itself, and it just hovers there with the gimbal in a very broken position. So promptly what I then did is I just then landed the drone, turned the drone off, back on again, and it solved the gimbal being absolutely skew-if. I mean, guys, it didn't look like the gimbal should even go that way, but it did, and it hasn't broken. It's been absolutely fine since. So I think we've got quite a lot to unpack here, because firstly, when I was doing my testing in an example I showed you earlier, if we commence active tracking from behind, okay, it will just follow at that level absolutely perfectly fine. Whereas for some bizarre reason, even though you are already active tracking and from behind and you have set the distance and altitude, when you click to follow from the front, it then rises to that 5 meter altitude that's been set in the DJI Fly app. Now, I think, as I've just mentioned, this is fundamentally flawed. I personally think that, like software such as Litchi, for example, if any of you have ever used that, what you then do is you set the altitude you want, you set the distance you want, you set the orientation with which you want the drone to follow you, then you click go, then the drone will move to that once you're happy with it. Whereas this way seems a little bit backwards with this new wheel, because it wants you to start the tracking, hence clicking go on active track, before the drone's actually in the position with which it's going to follow you from. You're starting the tracking, so immediately, especially if you're flying in a really silly area like I was, where it's, really built up full of bushes, trees, etc., it's a really difficult one to predict, because you don't know you don't know how the drone is going to behave. You don't know whether it's going to stay there till you walk past. You don't know whether it's going to start flying to the right-hand side of you, or it could start flying to the left-hand side of you. You don't really know what's going to happen. Whereas obviously, as I've mentioned with the old way, you set those distances and altitudes And I think that just worked a little bit better. If DJI continue like this, I think there's going to be a lot more crashes. And of course, there is the elephant in the room, the fact that this drone had just done absolutely perfectly in the obstacle avoidance test, and the fact that it was picking up the obstacles above us, but yet seemingly did nothing about them, and just continued ascending to the point where it would just hit those. Now, I don't know if any of you have found this problem. You might well say, Gavin, you're just an idiot. Nobody flies their drone in these built-up areas with branches and leaves and trees everywhere, okay? And yes, it was an absolutely extreme test, but the interesting part of this is the drone had already aced it, okay? It was when I wasn't even moving that it decided to just fly its own flight path and then go and crash. So I think this is a real interesting one. So there we go. You know, it is what it is. The drone survived, but ultimately something to be aware of. Please do give this video a big thumbs up if you found it useful or at least entertaining. Even if you think I'm an idiot, okay, it tells the YouTube algorithm more people just like you might want to watch my content. Subscribe if you're awesome. And what I will do is I'll leave a link to the full active tracking test so you can see it in action right here to save you a few clicks. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. See you again soon.